Welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. On the program this week, we review Nigeria's relations with South Africa following President Jacob Zuma's two-day visit to the country. I'll give you a hint. Analysts are impressed President Zuma recalled Nigeria's brotherly role during the fight against apartheid. Now, staying with bilateral ties, the Swiss government takes a step further in strengthening ties with Nigeria by opening a consulate general in Lagos. We speak to Consul General Yves Nicolette on the establishment of a new consulate and Switzerland's relations with Nigeria. And these are all coming up shortly, but first let's check in on other discussions in diplomatic circles. Let's begin at the United Nations, which on Friday adopted recommendations made by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to repatriate peacekeeping units where there are grounds to suspect their personnel have engaged in widespread sexual exploitation and abuse. Last week, the UN reported 99 allegations of sexual exploitation or sexual abuse in 2015 that UN peacekeepers took part in. The UN is worried the figure is a sharp increase from the numbers reported in 2014 across UN peacekeeping system, which is 80. Secretary General Ban's recommendation of repatriation was endorsed at the UN Security Council meeting.
The resolution underscores that peacekeepers found guilty, not those accused, those found guilty of committing SEA, do not deserve to serve in UN peacekeeping missions, sending a clear message to troop and police contributing countries who fail to take action to prevent or punish credible allegations of sexual abuse and exploitation, as well as to all member states and to UN bodies to ensure that these investigations are carried out thoroughly, promptly, and impartially.
In the face of this disturbing trend across a number of our peacekeeping operations, it is imperative that our collective response is more effective. My report proposes strong new initiatives in three key areas. First, ending impunity. Second, helping and supporting victims. And third, strengthening accountability, including through action by member states.
Checking in on the migrant situation in Europe, hundreds of migrants at Greece's Idomeni border camp on Friday decided to seek shelter at one of the country's reception centers. They were received by volunteers and aid agencies and government agencies who assisted with food, clothes, and any other supplies needed. Latest government figures show more than 42,000 refugees and migrants have been stranded in Greece as of Friday, most of them children. To ease the congestion, the government set up 20 reception centers around the country to house the migrants.
Look, I mean, I think that the state of play here at Idomeni speaks for itself. It's a lot of people crammed up against the border, surrounded by mud, surrounded by water, surrounded by puddles with really inadequate shelters, all of them waiting to know what's going to happen next week at the EU summit.
I have just two solutions for this situation. The first is maybe to open these borders, and the second is they die here in this camp, in this point.
Speaking of refugees, that's the situation at the Boujour refugee camp in southwest Algeria, near the town of Tindouf, occupied by the Sahrawi people fleeing fighting in Western Sahara. It's been more than 40 years these people have been asking for an independent state. The Boujour camp is home to at least 165,000 Sahrawi refugees, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency, which classifies about 90,000 of them as vulnerable. Refugees here use mud to make bricks and rebuild their homes after floods damaged the area last year. There's hardly any electricity, so they have to rely on generators. But with no money to buy fuel, they depend on car batteries to power lights at night. The water shortage is tackled by tankers delivering water at least once a month. Finally, U.S. President Barack Obama hosted the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau last week, ending frosty U.S.-Canada relations. Both leaders agreed to joint steps in fighting climate change, including cutting methane emissions from oil and gas operations, and signing last year's Paris climate deal as soon as possible.
As the first U.S. president to visit the Arctic, I saw how both of our nations are threatened by rising seas, melting permafrost, disappearing glaciers, and sea ice. And so we are focusing on making sure the Paris Agreement is fully implemented, and we're working to double our investments in clean energy research and development. Today we're also announcing some new steps. Canada is joining us in our aggressive goal to bring down methane emissions in the oil and gas sectors in both of our countries. And together we're going to move swiftly to establish comprehensive standards to meet that goal.
The President and I have announced today that we'll take ambitious action to reduce methane emissions nearly by half from the oil and gas sector, reduce use and emissions of hydrofluorocarbons, and implement aligned greenhouse gas emission standards for heavy-duty vehicles, amongst other plans to fight climate change.
We'll be right back.